My name is Eleanor Drayton. I'm 64. People often tell me I sound younger on the phone, maybe because I still try to start each day with purpose. This morning, purpose meant a drive to Tybee Island, to the house my husband and I bought 20 years ago, the one that had been silent since his passing. The highway shimmered in the early heat. Spanish moss swayed over the road, brushing the roof of my car like a whisper. I'd packed cleaning supplies, a set of spare keys, and the lease documents my lawyer had prepared. It felt good to plan again, to make something practical out of the past. When the radio hummed through old jazz, I tapped my fingers lightly on the steering wheel. The sound reminded me of Sunday morning's coffee, fresh paint, my husband reading the paper on that same porch I was about to repaint. As I crossed the Lazaretto Creek Bridge, gulls circled above the water. White flashes against the sky. Beyond them, the outline of the house appeared a quiet, pale yellow cottage tucked among seagrass and salt wind. I slowed as the tires rolled onto the gravel drive. The air smelled of marsh and ocean, familiar and clean. For a moment, peace settled deep in my chest. Then I noticed something out of place, a small red tricycle resting near the steps, its handlebar ribbons faded by sun. Had the children been playing here before, I hadn't noticed it until now. I left the engine running, heart steady but curious, and reached for my keys. Inside, a faint sound carried through the wall's soft laughter, the kind that doesn't belong to an empty house. The laughter grew clearer as I climbed the porch steps. A second toy, a stuffed bear missing one eye, lay half buried in sand beside the doorframe. I pressed my palm to the doorknob. It turned easily. Had I forgotten to lock it this time? Or had someone used the spare key left by Robert? My breath slowed, as if my body understood what my mind refused to. Inside, the air smelled nothing like the house I left months ago. Fried food, crayons, and something sweet but stale syrup maybe hung thick in the air. The white walls I'd just repainted were smudged with small handprints. On the coffee table sat half a sandwich and a pink plastic cup, dripping juice onto the wood. From the kitchen came the sound of dishes clinking, water running. I followed it, heart thudding, and there she was, Brittany, my daughter-in-law, wearing my apron, stirring something in a pot as if this were her home. Her blonde hair was pinned up quickly, strands falling loose, and her phone played music beside the stove. She looked up, startled for only half a second before her face smoothed into something casual. "Oh, you're early," she said, as if she'd been expecting me. Then, nodding toward the living room, "Since you're here, you'll watch them now." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Words tangled behind my tongue, my apron, my house, my silence. Finally, my voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" Brittany shrugged, unfazed. "James said it's fine. The kids love it here, and you weren't using it anyway." 3 small faces peeked from the hallway, 2 boys and a little girl clutching a crayon. They stared at me, then ran giggling back toward what used to be the guest bedroom. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You moved into my home without asking." Brittany smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Eleanor, don't be dramatic. It's family. You of all people should understand helping family out." Something inside me went very still. The ocean wind outside rattled the window pane, faint but sharp, as if echoing a warning I hadn't yet put into words. I looked around at the scattered toys, the grease-streaked counter, the life built here without permission, and understood that peace had been replaced by something else entirely. Brittany leaned against the counter, arms folded, the wooden spoon still in her hand like a weapon she didn't need. "You have 2 houses, Eleanor," she said lightly, though there was an edge in her tone. "We have nowhere." James's apartment lease ended, and with his new job in Atlanta, it just made sense to stay here for a while. You weren't even using it. I glanced around the smudged walls, the overturned cushions, the stack of dishes by the sink. Every inch of the house felt wrong, like someone had rewritten my life in crayon. You had no right to move in, I said, my voice steady but low. She shrugged. It's not like we broke in. I noticed a spare key in that drawer when I last visited, she said, trying to sound casual. She pointed toward the sideboard by the stairs, where I'd found his letters and mementos months ago. I remembered it was there. So technically, we didn't trespass. For a second, I couldn't breathe. That key had stayed untouched since the day I buried him. It was supposed to stay that way, a symbol of trust, of something finished. The children's laughter echoed from the hallway, wild and free, filling the space that once held quiet afternoons and the hum of old jazz. My fingers tightened around the back of a chair. You'll need to leave today. Brittany, I said. I'll give you time to gather your things. Her mouth fell open. Are you serious? You're really throwing your own family out? What kind of person does that? A person who's tired of being taken advantage of. She scoffed. You're heartless. The word hit the air like a slap, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned to face her fully. Boundaries aren't cruelty, I said quietly. They're the only reason love can survive. Brittany's face hardened. For the first time, I saw not confusion, but defiance. I knew then that this was only the beginning. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone beside a cold cup of tea. The number glowed on the screen, James. My son. I pressed call again. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. His recorded voice cheerful and distant. James, it's Mom. Call me as soon as you can. It's important. I ended the call and waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, carrying the sound of the tide. Somewhere in the house, one of the children cried, and Brittany's voice rose in irritation before fading into silence. I tried again the next morning. Same result. No answer, no message. Only that same clipped tone that had become his way of keeping distance since the move to Atlanta. By afternoon, I stopped by the small grocery store near the bridge to pick up supplies. The clerk, a chatty woman I'd known for years, smiled politely. Didn't expect to see you here, Eleanor. Thought you'd be up in Atlanta visiting James and his lady friend. I froze. His what? Oh, well, someone mentioned he's been traveling with a colleague. I assumed you were aware. Pretty thing. Long dark hair. Sorry. I just assumed you knew. I thanked her, though the words barely made it past my throat. Driving back, the island air felt heavier than usual. The gulls that followed above seemed to echo a truth I hadn't wanted to see. Brittany hadn't moved into my house out of desperation. She was hiding from him, from shame, from whatever collapse she didn't want the world to witness. The betrayal settled like salt on an open wound, familiar, stinging, impossible to wash away. The next morning, I drove into Savannah, the city glinting pale under a winter sun. The streets were quiet, the air sharp with the scent of river salt and distant pine. I parked outside a brick building on Whitaker Street, where the gold letters still read Ellison and Crane, attorneys at law. Mr. Ellison had handled our estate papers when Robert died. A patient man with silver hair and gentle hands. He greeted me with that same calm tone. Mrs. Drayton, it's been too long. Please, come in. He listened as I described everything Brittany's sudden move-in, the children, the key she'd taken. I laid it all out neatly, the way I used to grade essays, precise, unemotional. When I finished, he leaned back and removed his glasses. You're still the sole owner of that property. There's no lease, no written consent, no tenancy. What's happening is called unlawful occupancy. He paused before adding softly, You're not unkind, Mrs. Drayton. You're just enforcing reality. The words steadied me more than I expected. He advised me to document everything: photos, messages, timestamps. You don't need to argue, he said. You only need proof. I nodded, remembering Robert's favorite saying, the difference between chaos and order is paper. After signing a few forms, I left his office with copies of the deed and a strange clarity. The law was cold, but it was clean. Each signed form a line of defense, steadier than guilt, firmer than any plea. Back home, I found the children drawing on the porch railing with chalk. Brittany didn't even glance at me as I passed. I went straight to my room, closed the door, and turned on the small printer by my desk. The deed came out crisp and white. I slipped it into an envelope, placed it inside my purse beside Robert's wedding ring, and pressed the clasp shut. For the first time in days, I breathed without trembling. The house was no longer just a memory or a burden. It was proof of everything I had built and everything I would protect. By the time I returned to Tybee that afternoon, the sky had turned the color of tarnished silver. The tide was low, and gulls wheeled lazily above the dunes. From outside the porch, I could already hear the hum of a cartoon playing inside, too loud, too familiar. When I opened the door, Brittany didn't even glance up. She was sitting cross-legged on the sofa, scrolling through her phone while the children ran circles around her. A pile of unfolded laundry spilled across the floor. "There you are," she said, her tone sharp with annoyance rather than guilt. "Good. You can finally help. Lunch isn't ready. The boys need clean clothes, and Mia spilled juice everywhere. Since you're here, you'll watch them now." I stood still, hands resting on my purse. "Excuse me." She looked up, smiling with the weary impatience of someone accustomed to giving orders. "It's not that complicated. Eleanor, just keep an eye on them for an hour or two. I need a break." Something inside me clicked softly. Finally, the calm that filled me wasn't anger but recognition. I had seen this pattern before Brittany giving orders, assuming I'd fold under the word family. I set my purse on the table and met her eyes. "Then I'll call their father." For the first time, she froze. Color drained from her face. "What? You heard me." I took out my phone and scrolled to James's number. "If he's not at work, he'll still answer about this." Brittany's breath hitched. He's away at work," she said quickly, her voice betraying a flicker of fear. I pressed the call button. The line rang twice before voicemail picked up. I spoke slowly, each word measured. "James, it's your mother. Your family is in my house without consent. Handle it, or the police will." When I ended the call, the silence that followed was thick as fog. The children had stopped running. Brittany's phone slipped from her fingers and landed on the couch with a dull thud. She stared at me, wide-eyed, mouth slightly open, as if the walls themselves had turned against her. "You wouldn't," she whispered. I reached for my purse again, calm and steady. I already did, outside. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt through the broken screen door. For the first time in weeks, the house felt like mine again. The deputies arrived not long after lunch, their patrol car rolling quietly into the driveway. I had been standing by the window, waiting not nervously, but with a strange kind of resolve. The children were napping, the television finally silent. A firm knock echoed through the house. Brittany appeared from the hallway, her face pale, a laundry basket clutched to her chest. When she saw the uniforms, she froze. "Afternoon, ma'am," one of the men said politely. He was older, gray at the temples, his badge catching a strip of sunlight. "We received a report about unauthorized occupancy. I'm Eleanor Drayton." I said, "This is my home." I handed him the envelope from my purse, the printed deed, neatly labeled. Brittany's voice cracked. "You can't do this. We're family." The older deputy glanced at her, his expression patient but firm. Family doesn't override ownership, ma'am. If the owner asks you to vacate, you must comply. Her shoulders dropped. For a moment, I saw the defiance drain away, replaced by something almost human fear. She turned, gathering the children's clothes with shaking hands. The boys began to cry, confused by the tension. Little Mia clung to her mother's leg, asking what was happening. I knelt beside her, smoothing her hair. It's okay. Sweetheart, you're going home with your mom. My own voice surprised me. It trembled only at the edges. Brittany stuffed clothes into a plastic bag, her movements clumsy. You've ruined everything, she whispered, not looking at me. James will never forgive you. I stood, my palms cold. That's between you and him. The deputies guided her gently toward the door, one carrying the children's things, the other holding the door open. The house grew quieter with each step they took. When the last child crossed the threshold, the older deputy gave me a small nod. We'll make sure they leave the property peacefully. Mrs. Drayton, thank you, I managed to say. The door shut softly behind them. Only the sound of the sea remained a low, steady rhythm against the shore. I gripped the back of a chair to steady my hands, breathing in the emptiness they left behind. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was something closer to relief and something heavier than regret. 3 days passed before the phone finally rang. The screen lit with James's name, and for a moment, I almost let it go to voicemail. When I answered, his voice came sharp, defensive. Mom, what the hell happened? Brittany says you called the police. You had them take the kids out of the house, out of our house. I closed my eyes, keeping my tone calm. It isn't your house, James. It's mine. It always has been. He exhaled hard. You could have called me first. You didn't have to embarrass her like that. I walked to the window, watching the marshlight shift over the water. I did call you, I said quietly. You didn't pick up. Before he could respond, I tapped the phone screen and played the saved voicemail. Brittany's voice filled the room, laughing, careless. The sound of a woman who thought she'd won. Your mother won't say anything. She never does. I'll just tell her we're staying until James gets back. She'll fold, she always does. When the recording ended, there was only silence on the line. Finally, James spoke, his voice lower. Mom, I didn't know it got that bad. I looked at the deed still lying on the table. A faint crease where my fingers had pressed too hard. You didn't ask to hear it. James, I said softly. He started to say something else but stopped. The quiet stretched between us, filled only by the hum of the ceiling fan and the distant cry of a gull. Then the line went dead. For a long time, I stood by the window, phone still in hand, wondering how silence could sound heavier than any argument. The next morning, the island felt strangely still. Word had already spread news travels fast on Tybee. At the market, a few neighbors stopped me between the aisles, their voices low but kind. You did right. Eleanor, said Mrs. Caldwell, the widow who lived 2 streets over. That house is yours. Don't let anyone make you feel bad for protecting it. I smiled, though it felt heavy on my face. Thank you, I said, meaning it. Outside, gulls cried over the pier, the same sound I'd always loved. But it felt different now, sharper, lonelier. I drove home with the windows down, the wind carrying the scent of salt and distant rain. The house stood spotless again. The deputies had returned the spare key. The locks were changed. Still, echoes lingered, the faint outline of a child's handprint on the porch rail, a single pink hair tie under the sofa. I left it there for a while before dropping it into the trash. That evening, I made tea and sat by the small desk in my room. My laptop screen glowed pale in the dim light as I typed a donation to the Savannah Family Support Fund. The page asked for a message to accompany the gift. I wrote, "For the children who are caught between grown-ups' mistakes." When I shut the lid, the room was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of the sea outside, soft, constant, forgiving in its own way. Weeks passed, and the house no longer felt like a wound. I hired a new property manager, a young woman named Clara, who moved with quiet confidence and wrote everything down in neat blue ink. Together, we walked through each room, checking paint, fixtures, and locks. Sunlight streamed across the floors, clean and bright, as if nothing chaotic had ever touched them. By the following week, the lease was signed. The new tenants, a retired couple from Charleston, wanted a quiet place to watch the tides. I handed Clara the keys, feeling no sadness, only relief. The house was ready to live again, and so was I. Back in Savannah, I found a rhythm. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I taught literacy classes at the community center. My students were adults nervous, hardworking, hopeful. Helping them find words again reminded me that even broken things can be restored with patience. One evening, I returned to Tybee to collect the last few boxes I'd stored in the shed. The sun was sinking low, turning the river to gold. I stood on the porch where Robert once strung the light fixture, the one he'd insisted would last longer than both of us. When darkness came, I flipped the switch. The bulb glowed softly against the boards, warm and steady. "This light isn't for waiting anymore," I whispered. "It's for peace." My phone buzzed hours later, a message from James. "Mom, thank you for standing firm." I read it twice, then set the phone face down on the railing. The air smelled of salt and honeysuckle. Beyond the marsh, the water shimmered quietly, carrying the day away. I stood there until the last color faded, the porch light holding steady against the night.